In 1911, Oroville, California became the unlikely stage for a moment that bridged centuries. From the wilderness emerged a man, emaciated, clad in tattered clothing and carrying the weight of a world long thought lost. His sudden appearance left the townspeople stunned, their imaginations racing. Who was he? Where had he come from? And why, after decades of silence, had he stepped forward now? This man was Ishi, the last known member of the Yahi Tribe, a people believed to have vanished in the violent upheaval of California's gold rush. For decades, whispers of the Yahi lingered in the region, like fading echoes of a tragic past. Entire villages had been destroyed, their people hunted and massacred in a tidal wave of greed and colonization. Yet, against all odds, here stood Ishi, a living contradiction to the belief that his people had been completely erased. But why Oroville? Why this moment? Ishi's emergence was no mere coincidence but the result of a heartbreaking journey. For years, he and a small band of surviving Yahi, including his family, had evaded detection by retreating deep into the rugged canyons of Deer Creek. They lived in near total isolation, mastering the art of survival in an unforgiving environment. Their shelters were camouflaged with astonishing precision, their movements carefully concealed. They foraged for acorns, hunted by night, and relied on their intimate knowledge of the land to stay hidden. Yet isolation came at a heavy cost. Disease, starvation, and the ever-present threat of settlers wore away at their fragile existence. One by one, Ishi lost his family and companions until he was utterly alone, the last voice of a people who had been silenced by history. By 1911, hunger and loneliness had pushed Ishi to the brink. The wilderness that had once protected him now felt desolate, devoid of the life and community that had sustained him. With no other choice, he made the unimaginable decision to leave his hidden world and step into one that had nearly destroyed his own. When Ishi entered Oroville, the townspeople's reactions ranged from fear to awe. Many had heard faint, half-forgotten tales of the Yahi, but those stories had long since faded into legend. To most, Ishi seemed like a man from another era. His disheveled appearance, coupled with his silence, defied their understanding of the world. Some saw him as a curiosity, others as a threat, and still others as a poignant reminder of what had been lost. His presence disrupted the narrative of modernity, forcing the townspeople to confront a past they had buried. Local authorities, unsure of how to respond, detained Ishi, labeling him a wild man. This term, steeped in prejudice, revealed the biases of a society that viewed indigenous peoples as relics of a bygone era. To the authorities, Ishi was an anomaly, an inconvenient reminder of a world they believed they had left behind. Yet even in this moment of misunderstanding, Ishi's quiet dignity began to shine through. Though he spoke no English and carried only a few handmade possessions, his presence communicated something profound, a connection to a way of life that had endured for centuries, even under unimaginable pressure. Within days, news of Ishi's arrival spread beyond Oroville, reaching the University of California. Anthropologists, including the renowned Alfred Kroeber, immediately recognized the extraordinary significance of this moment. Ishi was not merely a curiosity. He was a living archive of Yahi culture, language, and traditions. For decades, anthropologists had worked tirelessly to document indigenous cultures, but here was something unprecedented. A man who embodied the very essence of a culture thought lost to history. But Ishi's emergence posed questions that reverberated far beyond Oroville. How does one individual bear the weight of an entire culture? How could someone so deeply rooted in a vanished world navigate the complexities of a modern one? And what responsibility did society have to protect, honor, and preserve the legacy of a man like Ishi, a man whose very survival was a miracle? The anthropologist's involvement marked a turning point, transforming what might have been a fleeting moment of misunderstanding into one of the most profound encounters in the history of cultural anthropology. For the townspeople of Oroville, Ishi was a man out of time, an enigmatic figure who defied their understanding of the present. But for the world, he was something far greater, a bridge between the past and the future, a living testament to the resilience of a culture that refused to be forgotten. To understand Ishi's extraordinary emergence, we must first confront the haunting and complex history of the Yahi people, a history that mirrors the broader tragedy faced by countless indigenous tribes during the expansion of settler colonialism in the United States. The Yahi were one of four groups within the Yana people, indigenous to the rugged forests, rivers, and canyons of Northern California. For centuries, they lived in harmony with the land, their survival intertwined with its rhythms and resources. The Yahi's way of life was deeply rooted in their environment. They relied on the acorns of oak trees, carefully processed and stored to sustain them through harsh winters. Deer and rabbits provided meat, while the rivers yielded fish, but this was more than survival. It was a rich cultural existence. The Yahi's stories, songs, and rituals reflected their connection to the natural world, celebrating its cycles and spiritual significance. In their language and beliefs, the land was not a resource to exploit, but a partner in their existence. This harmony, however, would prove to be their greatest vulnerability. The mid-19th century marked the beginning of the end for the Yahi. With the discovery of gold in California in 1848, settlers flooded into the region, driven by dreams of wealth and prosperity. The influx was swift and devastating. To the settlers, the indigenous population was seen not as neighbors but as obstacles, barriers to the land and resources they sought to claim. This dehumanizing perspective fueled an era of unprecedented violence. Entire Yahi villages were attacked and burned, their inhabitants slaughtered without hesitation. Our men, women, and children were hunted like game, often killed in what settlers referred to as Indian hunting expeditions. These massacres were not isolated incidents, but systematic, often state-supported actions, justified by the ideology of manifest destiny. The belief that American expansion was divinely ordained and inevitable. The Yahi, being smaller in number and more geographically isolated than other groups, were particularly vulnerable to this wave of destruction. By the late 1860s, the Yahi were presumed extinct, their lands seized and their existence reduced to little more than a historical footnote. But this assumption was wrong. A small band of Yahi, including Ishi's family, had retreated deep into the canyons of Deer Creek. In this remote and inhospitable terrain, they carved out a fragile existence, relying on their extraordinary knowledge of the land to remain hidden. Their survival was a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. The Yahi moved only under the cover of darkness, left no footprints, and constructed shelters so well camouflaged they were invisible to the untrained eye. They foraged acorns, hunted quietly, and avoided rivers where their presence might be detected. For decades, they defied the odds, evading the settlers who had driven them to the brink of extinction. But this survival came at a cost. Isolation, while protecting them from immediate violence, also deepened their sense of loss. The Yahi had not only lost their homes and loved ones, but also the communal fabric that had once defined their identity. What remained was a ghostly echo of a once thriving community, sustained by the sheer will of its last members. The turning point came in 1908, when a group of surveyors stumbled upon one of the Yahi's hidden camps. Though the Yahi escaped, they left behind vital tools and supplies, which they had no means to replace. This discovery marked the beginning of the end. Without the resources to sustain themselves, Ishi and his family faced starvation. Over the next 3 years, his last remaining companions succumbed to disease, hunger, and despair. By 1911, Ishi was utterly alone, the final thread connecting his people's history to the present. The decline of the Yahi was not just a story of physical violence, but of systemic erasure. As settlers occupied the land, they dismissed the languages, traditions, and histories of the indigenous peoples they displaced. The Yahi's knowledge of their environment, their spiritual beliefs, and their cultural identity were disregarded and, for a time, forgotten. This erasure was not accidental. It was part of the broader narrative of colonization which sought to rewrite history to exclude the voices of those who had been silenced. Ishi's survival, then, was nothing short of miraculous. Within him, he carried the songs, stories, and wisdom of a world that had been violently uprooted. His emergence forced the world to confront uncomfortable truths. How could such devastation have been allowed to happen? What does it mean for humanity to lose entire cultures to the relentless march of history? And what responsibility do we bear in preserving the voices of those who have been displaced? Through Ishi, the Yahi's story was finally given a voice that had been silenced for too long. His life became a testament to resilience, not just his own, but that of his ancestors, who had fought to preserve their identity in the face of unimaginable loss. The Yahi's story, as seen through Ishi, reminds us that history is not merely a record of events. It is the lived experience of people, their triumphs and tragedies, and the lessons they leave behind. Ishi was not just the last of his tribe. He was the embodiment of a culture's resilience, a living connection to a world that colonization had tried to erase. When Ishi stepped into the modern world, he became both a revelation and a mystery. His arrival at the University of California marked the beginning of a remarkable chapter, a life caught between preservation and adaptation. Taken under the care of anthropologist Alfred Kroeber and his team, Ishi transitioned from the rugged isolation of Deer Creek to the bustling confines of a university museum. In this unfamiliar world, he not only shared the story of his people, but also demonstrated the quiet dignity and resilience that would define his legacy. At the museum, Ishi became an invaluable teacher. Through his hands, the Yahi way of life came alive. He demonstrated how to craft tools with astonishing precision, flaking obsidian into razor-sharp arrowheads and weaving intricate baskets from natural fibers. These skills, honed over generations, showcased a level of ingenuity that fascinated both scholars and visitors. Yet Ishi's teachings went beyond the material. Through his stories, songs, and rituals, he revealed the spiritual depth of the Yahi people, their connection to the land, and the values that had sustained them through centuries of hardship. Each demonstration, each shared memory was not just a lesson in anthropology, it was an act of cultural survival. Despite his contributions, Ishi's life in the modern world was fraught with challenges. The anthropologists who worked with him revered him as a cultural informant, yet the societal lens through which he was viewed often wavered between admiration and objectification. At times, Ishi was treated as a living exhibit, put on display for curious onlookers who marveled at his skills and appearance, without fully understanding the depth of his humanity. These moments revealed the ethical complexities of cultural preservation. While Kroeber and his team sought to honor Ishi's heritage, their actions occasionally blurred the line between respect and exploitation. How could they balance their mission to document Yahi culture with the need to honor Ishi as an individual, not merely a symbol? Yet, despite these challenges, Ishi bore his circumstances with remarkable grace. He built friendships, learned English, and found ways to connect with the people around him. His kindness and openness left a profound impression on everyone he met. Even in the face of unimaginable loss, Ishi displayed no bitterness. When asked about the massacres that had decimated the Yahi, his responses were marked by quiet strength rather than anger. It was this dignity, coupled with his willingness to share his heritage, that transformed Ishi into more than a historical figure. He became a symbol of resilience, demonstrating the enduring power of culture, even when it is on the brink of extinction. Through his time at the museum, Ishi shared not just the practical aspects of Yahi life, but also its deeper philosophical and spiritual dimensions. He revealed a worldview shaped by harmony with nature, respect for community, and an understanding of life's fragility. His teachings reminded those around him of the profound knowledge held by indigenous cultures, knowledge that modern society often overlooks in its pursuit of progress. Ishi's journey in the modern world also raised questions that remain relevant today. How do we honor the cultures we seek to preserve? Can we truly respect an individual's heritage without reducing them to a subject of study? And what does it mean to celebrate a culture that has been all but erased by history? These questions, though uncomfortable, are essential to understanding the legacy of Ishi and the Yahi people. Perhaps most poignantly, Ishi's life demonstrated that adaptation does not mean assimilation. While he learned the ways of the modern world, he never abandoned the core of who he was. He carried the Yahi's stories, rituals, and values with him, ensuring that they would not be forgotten. In doing so, he challenged the idea that a culture must vanish when its people are displaced. Instead, he showed that even a single individual can preserve a world's worth of wisdom. For those who worked with him, Ishi was more than an anthropological treasure. He was a friend, a guide, and a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Through his quiet strength, he taught them not just about the Yahi, but about the importance of empathy, respect, and understanding in a world too often divided by ignorance. Ishi's life was a testament to the power of connection between past and present, between cultures and between people. And in that connection, he found a way to bridge the seemingly insurmountable gap between a vanished world and the modern one. Ishi's legacy transcends the story of one man. It stands as a profound reminder of the fragility of cultural heritage and the resilience of the human spirit. His life serves as a mirror reflecting humanity's capacity for destruction, preservation, and redemption. Though he came to us as the last of his people, Ishi gave the world an extraordinary gift, a glimpse into a way of life that would have otherwise been lost to time. At the University of California, Ishi shared a treasure trove of knowledge about the Yahi people. His songs, stories, and craftsmanship provided anthropologists with an invaluable window into a culture that had thrived in harmony with nature for centuries. Every arrowhead he shaped, every basket he wove, and every song he sang became a thread in the fabric of Yahi history, preserved for future generations. These contributions have since become foundational resources for understanding indigenous cultures, not just in California, but across North America. Yet Ishi's legacy is not confined to academia. His story resonates far beyond the walls of the museum, challenging us to confront the injustices faced by indigenous peoples and the ongoing threats to cultural diversity around the world. How many voices like Ishi's have been silenced before they could share their wisdom? How many languages, traditions, and histories have been lost because the world failed to listen? These questions remain as urgent today as they were over a century ago. But even as we celebrate Ishi's contributions, his story raises profound ethical questions. After his death in 1916, Ishi's body was cremated, but his brain was removed and sent to the Smithsonian Institution without the consent of his surviving friends or the native community. This act, which sparked outrage and remains controversial to this day, underscores the challenges of preserving a culture while respecting the dignity of those who embody it. How can we honor someone's heritage if we fail to honor their humanity? This misstep serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that cultural preservation must be rooted in respect, not exploitation. Despite these missteps, Ishi's life continues to offer invaluable lessons. His resilience in the face of unimaginable loss, his willingness to share his knowledge, and his grace in bridging two vastly different worlds serve as an enduring source of inspiration. Ishi's story compels us to reflect on the responsibilities we bear, not only to document and preserve cultural heritage, but to ensure that such preservation respects the voices and agency of those it seeks to honor. Ishi's life also underscores the power of cultural resilience. Though he was the last of his tribe, he carried forward the knowledge, values, and traditions of the Yahi people. He demonstrated that even in the face of near-total annihilation, the essence of a culture can endure if it is remembered and shared. His willingness to teach and his refusal to let his people's story fade into obscurity transformed him into a bridge, a living connection between a vanished world and the modern one. Today, as indigenous communities around the world fight to protect their languages, traditions, and identities, Ishi's story resonates with renewed urgency. His life challenges us to recognize that every culture, no matter how small or isolated, holds wisdom that enriches the human story. And his legacy reminds us that the preservation of cultural diversity is not just an act of remembrance, it is a responsibility that defines our shared humanity. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from Ishi's life is the hope it provides. Even in the face of unimaginable loss, Ishi chose to share his heritage with grace, generosity, and resilience. His story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and a call to action for all of us to listen, to learn, and to protect the diversity of voices that make up the human experience. In the end, Ishi was not simply the last of his tribe. He was a teacher, a guide, and a reminder of the profound interconnectedness of humanity. His life calls us to honor the past, not just as a series of events, but as a collection of lived experiences that continue to shape our present and future. In preserving Ishi's legacy, we are not just remembering the Yahi. We are affirming the value of every culture, every voice, and every story that contributes to the richness of our shared world.